Hi, I'm Cassidy Shaffer, and this is part 4 of the Linux files tutorial. In this video, we'll be discussing changing file permissions. The chmod command is used to change or set the file or directory permissions. This command allows two ways to indicate the permission change, the octal method and the symbolic method. So for the octal method, you will give the chmod command three numbers that are between 0 and 7, which correspond to certain read, write, and execute permissions, as you can see from the table. The first number represents the permissions for the user, the second number represents the permissions for the group, and the last number represents the permissions for others. So for the first example here, we are changing the permissions on the file named example. The first number is 6, which means the user can read and write, and the following numbers are both 0, which means that the group and others cannot read, write, or execute. The second example here is changing the file permissions on the file named program. The first number is 7, which means that the user can read, write, and execute, and the following numbers are both 5s, which means that the group and others can read, write, but not execute. So as long as you have this chart handy, it's easy to change the permissions by the octal method. The symbolic method is more intuitive than the octal method. U represents user, G represents group, O represents others, and A represents all user, group, and others. Now for the first example, we are telling chmod to give the user the execute permission for the file named example. Now the second example says that we want everyone to have the read and execute permission for the file named program, but we also want group and others to not have the write permission. Now there's other ways that you can use the symbolic method other than using the plus or the minus, but as long as you know how to add permissions and minus permissions, then it's not necessary to know all the other stuff. Now let's look at changing some file permissions in a Linux terminal. So now I have a Linux terminal opened and my current working directory is files like it was in the last video. Now if I type in ls.l, I can see that the permissions for the file named files introduction is the user can read and write, the group can write or read, and the others can read as well. Now, say I want to give everyone permissions to read, write, and execute on that file. Now, if we're going to use the octal method, we're going to put chmod 777, and that number is from the table, and then the file name. Now, if you remember right, if your file has spaces, you have to put quotation marks around your file name. Now, if I list the files again, you can see that the file permissions have changed so that everyone can read, write, and execute. Now say I want to change that back to the way it was. Now I want to get back to changing the permissions to this. Now referring back to that table, I know that if I put in 644 and then the file name again, and then type in the ls command, you can see that I'm able to change the file permissions back to the way they were. Now let's look at the file name folder. The permissions are that the user can read, write, and execute, and the group and others can read and execute but not write. Now say I want to do the same thing as I did before, giving everyone permission to read, write, and execute, but let's do it the symbolic way. One way to do it is to put in chmod A, which means everyone, and I want to add the read, write, and execute command to them. So, and I don't have a space in my file name, so I don't have to put quotation marks. And now let's list them again. And as you can see, everyone has the permissions that they need. Everyone can read, write, and execute. Now say I want to change it back to this here. So the only difference is that the group and others cannot write. So all I have to do to change it back with the symbolic method is to say group and others minus the write permission, and then the file name. So let's list them again. And as you can see, it's back to where it was. Now I'll see you in the next video.